Let's play a little game, you and me. I'm going to describe in great detail a Resident Evil game, and you're going to try to guess which one it is. Ready? Here we go. In Resident Evil Blank, you play as a hero from a previous entry in the series. The protagonist is well known and well liked for his previous adventure, having spent dusk till dawn fighting for his life within an expansive estate, uncovering a secret biohazardly plot along the way, of course. This game takes place in a small, isolated Eastern European community where the hero searches for his kidnapped daughter. The community in question is full of dangerous, brainwashed locals, some of which are straight-up monstrosities, others mechanically enhanced soldier-ish bioweapons. All are controlled by an evil, mythic, matriarchal figure, someone who once sheltered and protected her community but turned to experimenting on them, aspiring to dominate the world, of course, after realizing the potential of her influence and power. This villain would, in the later chapters of course, turn out to be just an ex-scientist wronged, with some connection to the big bad Resi pharmaceutical company. The antagonist's scheme involves using a child as a vessel in some sort of poorly explained virus-driven reincarnation/consciousness transfer. The hero's effort to thwart this plot culminates in a massive final fight, won finally in part with the help of a surprise appearance and clutch sniper shot by someone whose first name starts with a C and whose last name is Redfield. Alright, easy, yeah? This is Resident Evil 8, aka Village, where you play as Ethan. You're off to fight Lycans in Romania to save your daughter Rose, and you've got to stop Mother Miranda along the way, right? Failure! Oof, I'm sorry, that one's gotta hurt. You got that one wrong, buddy. Hey everybody, we got a fake fan over here, we got a real fucking loser over here who doesn't even know niche Resident Evil facts. What's the point? Hey, clean up on aisle U. No, the game I'm talking about is Resident Evil Revelations 2, where you play as Barry Burton. You're off to fight the Afflicted on an island in the Baltic Sea to save your daughter Moira, and you've got to stop the Overseer, aka Alex Wesker, aka fucking Albert Wesker's secret sister or something, along the way. This is the Resident Evil game nobody fucking played, and that Capcom is hoping nobody fucking plays so that they can keep getting away with desecrating its corpse, yanking pieces off of it, and plugging its groundbreaking yet underrated features into their new games for as long as possible, including, most recently, their remake of a title past. This is a game so good, so packed with wicked ideas and enemies and levels that nobody actually played, that they've managed to recycle it for nearly a decade under everyone's radar, forcing a little bit more of it into every subsequent game they've made, or remade, all the way to today in what I think is the most Revelations 2-esque game since Revelations 2, the Resident Evil 4 Remake. A game which I think is really cool, by the way. Now, I'm a pretty big Resident Evil fan, both literally and figuratively, which is both why I really liked 2021's RE4 VR, but also couldn't equip my grenades because my grapefruit-sized chest extrusions were physically in the way of the game's inventory. Go figure. If you too were obsessed with RE4 growing up and had unregulated internet access, you might remember me as the kid who was reenacting a bunch of cutscenes alone, playing every character myself. If you saw any, it probably would have been the Leon vs. Krauser knife fight I did using a fork and spoon because my teacher said I couldn't show myself playing with knives for a school project. Once again, go figure. As someone who played through the Wii version honestly an uncountable amount of times growing up, that is to say, someone who felt like they knew the game, its world, and its mechanics like the back of their hand, I was surprised just how much discovery described my experience with the VR port. And really, like, that's what this was. As much as it's a significant change to play with a head-mounted display and two little manettes, the core of the VR version was the same we all played on the GameCube over 15 years ago. The VR version was no more a remake than the Wii version itself was. This truly was just a port. A really good one, admittedly, but nothing foundational to the game had been changed in over a decade. Thankfully, I should say. Which is why those little moments of discovery in RE4 VR are probably more accurately framed as uncovering. Not of anything new, of things that didn't exist before, but of things that had been there all along, just that you lacked the perspective to notice. In the Village, I was taken aback by just how much the layout and design of every house made sense, stopping for a few minutes to notice how the chimneys of wood-burning ovens actually extruded to the outside, exactly where they were meant to. A detail Meta themselves can't get right in their own virtual home VR environments. In combat, I was struck by how useful the Punisher had been all along, the game's second unlockable gun, and a weak one at that, but whose unique penetration perk was supposed to distinguish it from other weapons. The original game's tank controls made it hard to apply, meaning the gun was mostly used for selling, but the amount of agency afforded by the VR version's controls let you unlock its true potential. All these years later, realizing you could close quarters John Wick these guys with this thing was enough to convince me to keep the Punisher all the way to the end, something I'd never done before. Playing Resident Evil 4 VR was like watching a compilation of life hacks. It was like figuring out ways to use tools you're already familiar with, but in ways you had never thought to employ before. Each little discovery and the joy it brought spoke not to the quality of the VR version, but to the strength of the original game. RE4 VR helped remind us why we all loved RE4 so much to begin with. It simply unlocked the game's hidden potential. I'm sure you're wondering about these. Good. Keep at it. The recent RE4 Remake, however, wasn't like that at all. As much as it might look like it sometimes, the original game isn't at the core here. The entire game has been rebuilt, so in some cases the original's details aren't there for you to uncover, but have actually been lost in translation. While the village's wood-burning stoves remain, more detailed than ever I should say, their rust and residue now part of this locale's storytelling, their exhausts no longer do. No, the chimneys no longer extrude to the exterior, not that you'd notice their absence unless you were looking for it. The remake's world feels more like a thoughtfully crafted theme park version of a nostalgically recalled piece of media than a low-resolution approximation of a real, lived-in space. It's a space that's designed to look really pretty from the side it's intended to be viewed from, and that knows its audience and delivers an experience tailored to wow them, specifically them. I think that's clearest in all the ways it calls back to the player's ingrained knowledge and mental models of RE4's moments and scenarios. There are the obvious examples that took everyone by surprise, not even worth mentioning at this point, but I think an underappreciated trick reused many times throughout the game by its level designers was, for lack of a better term, copy-pasting the exact layouts of rooms from the original game, but structuring the game in such a way that you progress through them backwards. It's almost the same idea as the mirror cups in freaking Mario Kart. What was once a level's exit is now its entrance, but otherwise nothing's changed. This is the best of both worlds for returning players, who get to recognize the layout enough to appreciate the effort that went into rebuilding it, but also haven't run the combat scenario from this side before, so can still be challenged without turning on the Resident Evil 4 part of their brain and going on autopilot. Changing the allocation of details allowed them to also flesh out some of the game's story, bringing to light just how much the first game got away with leaving out. The remake is less about uncovering hidden details embedded within something familiar, something you know, something like Resident Evil 4, and more about getting to see all the new color added to parts of a well-respected piece whose artists, upon almost 20 years of reflection, thought it needed. Discovery in the remake doesn't feel like it does in the VR version, like, oh wow, I never noticed that, but rather like, oh wow, I would have never thought about that way. It's, oh shit, I never realized how massive El Gigante is versus, oh damn, I never considered how a monster like El Gigante would come to be. Detail has been deliberately added and in some cases removed by authorial judgment, not by the consumer's ability to pay attention through immersive VR technology or otherwise. Rather than hidden potential, the Resident Evil 4 remake simply fleshes out RE4's weaker elements and invests in its untapped potential. Throughout the game, especially my first playthrough, I found myself very rarely entering what was supposed to be a joke, but is probably actually a real physiological state I and many others share due to sheer amount of time invested, my brain's Resident Evil 4 mode. Due to it hanging off that untapped potential and being designed to straddle the line between familiar and unfamiliar, very few times did I just zone out and let the years of knowledge and muscle memory associated with this game's story mode take over. I actually admit I found it really tough. I had a lot of difficulty with the combat, and a lot of trouble getting lost. I can't believe how much I relied on the map in the remake to find my way. But on my second playthrough, something changed. After starting New Game Plus and messing around in Mercenaries a bit, something unexpectedly clicked. And it happened suddenly and noticeably enough for me to recognize it and know I couldn't attribute this abrupt change in, just having gotten better with time. It was like from one moment to the next, I was just better. more competent, and more comfortable with the game. And until recognizing a few days later that what had really just happened was my brain subconsciously turning on my Resident Evil Revelations 2 mode, and the realization that truly Resident Evil has yet to progress as a series past a PS3 game from 2015, I was having a lot of fun with my newfound skill. To understand my pending revelation and ensuing disappointment, we're gonna have to go back to Romania for a sec. Now, I'm not gonna keep it a secret, both 7 and 8, aka Village, represent a style of Resident Evil, to me, that's fun for one go-around, but doesn't have enough mechanical depth to be worth revisiting as many times as I have 4, 5, 6, or either of the Revelations games. And while Village is a masterclass in atmosphere, the impact is lost on repeat playthroughs. As far as what it is you do in the game, the gameplay, it's not very complex nor very fun. At least compared to other Resident Evil games, that's a fucking given here. And as far as what you see, hear, and feel throughout the game, it comes off feeling a little, I don't know, staged maybe? Like I said before, theme park-ish. And that disappointed me a little, especially given the state of the current indie survival horror scene. As I argued for 28 minutes back at launch, an indie game like Phasmophobia captures more of the essence of the original Resident Evil than return-to-form entries like 7 or Village do, all while more creatively applying modern artificial intelligence technology to tropes of the series, like the stalker enemy.
Oh god.
Oh shit.
Oh, she's right here.
Stuff is happening.
Oh, this might be a front.
Oh, there's a creepy ghost next to Lamb.
Oh wait, that's fine.
No, that's not a hunt. It's just fucking with us.
But there was something beyond the artifice of Village's atmosphere and the corniness of its narrative that bugged me a little. While I still did really enjoy what it did with its world building, I couldn't shake off this feeling of deja vu, like I had seen all of this before in Resident Evil Revelations 2. Now, as proud as I am for being able to describe two games at once for a bit, I'll admit there certainly are some differences. For example, while Resident Evil 8's enemies are victims of Eastern European village poverty and power dynamics, Revelation 2's are more victims of slum poverty. There's an Eastern Bloc twist here I think is really unique for the series. Where 8 took arguably a safe path by drawing a lot of inspiration from 4, telling the story of innocent villagers living on the outskirts of a castle whose ruling class and religious cult leaders use them as cannon fodder, Revelation 2's villain is depicted as a proletarian dictator, someone who brought industry to this island and empowered its working class people before testing experimental viruses on them and augmenting them with mechanical parts. Unlike Mother Miranda's freaky ceremony used to transfer consciousness to a little girl, Alex Wesker's applies AI and a new T-virus to transfer her mind to a host child. Look, I could sit here all day and bore you with the details, but overall, both games tell extremely similar stories in extremely similar settings with extremely similar themes. I got that same vibe with Resi 7 actually. When I first saw the freaky little psychic girl, I was like, oh, hey, I guess they were disappointed nobody got to see their freaky little psychic girl in Revi 2, so they just ripped her concept off for the new game. I had no idea what that would foreshadow in the sequel though, because it's not just the plots and settings and characters and themes that are common between titles. A lot of concepts from Revi 2 found their way, sometimes barely modified, poking around inside Village. One of the most egregious examples is Village's late-game tanker ship-esque chapter, the Factory Stage, which feels a lot like the Asylums in Revi 2. Both are locations where infected found themselves being augmented with mechanical pieces for strengthening. In fact, the main soldier enemies you fight in Village's factory, you know, the guys with the huge drills attached to their arms who hold them up like little fuckers to conceal their big red glowing weak spots, these guys are pulled straight from one of Revi 2's recurring boss fights. This dude, who stalks you with a massive industrial drill that happens to be bulletproof and blocks your line of sight to some of his big red glowing weak spots. Again, it feels like they were disappointed in how few people got to experience this enemy design, and so they just recycled it and hoped nobody would notice. Not that, you know, it really matters. At the end of the day, more people just get to engage with this cool design this way. Don't read this wrong. I'm not in any way calling this lazy. It's just that, as a dedicated enough player to play through some of the nicher titles, your reward is the ability to spot reuse. And that's, I don't know, a little bit sucky. It's the same with the item crafting. RE7 comes around and everyone's like, whoa, so cool! What an interesting way to give players agency over their inventory. Meanwhile, Revi 2 introduced that system 2 years prior and nobody was aware. Like, hey, this isn't such a big deal, y'all. Or, fuck, okay, so a couple of weeks after launch, they add a new Mercenaries mode to Village, right? And everybody's freaking out. Oh my god, it's so good, I love all the new changes, which basically boil down to, one, there's a lobby now where you can buy and upgrade weapons between stages, and two, there are power-ups. Both of which represent like not even 2% of the absolutely whack shit the Resi devs came up with back in the day and crammed into a neat little thing called Raid Mode. And by neat little thing, of course, I mean something quite easily 10 times the size of the main story, to the point that to me, Raid Mode is RE2's main mode. Raid Mode is the evolution, or even I'd say the sequel, to Mercenaries. It takes this fun little post-game unlock, an arcade challenge mode, gives it structure, spreads itself across hundreds of levels, gives itself room to breathe and paces out its difficulty curve, lets itself expand upon each of the game's combat mechanics in ways the main story just can't afford to, and even fucking frames itself within the narrative as a thing that exists within the world of Resident Evil. Without getting into it, it serves a similar purpose within the story as Metal Gear Solid's VR missions do, if you know what I'm talking about. Hell, this lobby's design alone goes way freaking harder than it needs to. It's like you're trapped in this space between worlds, between Resident Evils, different styles of architecture composited into each other in ways that shouldn't be possible, in the same vein as the mode's levels are constantly combining elements of Revelations 2, Revelations 1, and even Resident Evils 5 and 6 to create experiences that feel unpredictable and staggering. This whole mode glows with creativity and attention to detail in a way that puts other games in this series, fucking scratch that, other games, period, to shame. Raid Mode is Resident Evil firing on all cylinders, and I swear they haven't come so close to matching half of this top speed ever since. So Resi Village's Mercenaries mode, this isn't new. This is a 10-year-old idea. This is a lesser version of what was in Revelations 2 on the PS3, of what was in fucking Revelations 1 on the Nintendo 3DS. Christ, I played a better version of this on something I could fold in half and fit in my pocket. And while it's great, like clearly it kicks a lot of ass to some people, seeing folks tout this as some upgrade Resi's been overdue for was just freaking ridiculous. Hey everybody, listen up. Resi's been here, Resi's done that. From its story to its levels to its bonus mode, Resident Evil 8 felt like a half-assed rehash of a game I honestly liked better. One that I think was more fun, more replayable, and more thoughtfully designed, not to mention multi-fucking player. Truly, I could talk about this all day, but Village certainly inherited a lot from its predecessor. Let me tell you, Resi 8 did the fucking rounds at the estate sale. I don't think it used anything it took to its maximum potential. Unlike a certain remake that came out recently, one that this whole video is supposed to be about.
RE4's remake might not have drawn direct inspiration from Revelations 2. I mean, how could it? By its nature as a remake, it was trying to be something else. But it did still lift one thing, arguably pretty core one, from Revelations 2. Its character control. I've heard the remake described as Resident Evil 4, but with modern controls at last, which I find really funny given nothing here wasn't already in Revelations 2 nearly 10 years ago. The dual-stick aiming, yep, the weapon quick select, yeah, the instant knife button and sprinting attacks, pretty sure Revelation 2 invented those. The dodge move, same. The revolutionary new crouch button and the stealth stages and quiet takedowns it paired with, you betcha. Except in many cases, Revelations does all these one better. The stealth, for instance, yeah, not everybody's a fan of it in the remake, but in Revelations 2, the inclusion of a smoke grenade allowed you to turn any of the game stages into a stealth level on demand, at least momentarily, letting you choose to avoid fights with tough enemies, opting for instant stealth takedowns instead. It also had the really neat idea of making your guns do more damage when you're in a crouched position, something that doesn't exist in Resi 4. A fair trade, it would seem, between damage and mobility. Or the quick select inventory. Revelations only had 4 slots, but mapping grenades to their own dedicated buttons meant you didn't need more than 4 slots, because grenades weren't part of the equation. It also used distinct buttons for dodging and crouching, unlike the remake, meaning 1, you could dodge on demand instead of only as a reaction to contextual prompts, turning dodging into a skill-based action rather than a quick-time event, and 2, you never accidentally crouched when the dodge failed. The influence doesn't stop at the controls, though admittedly it doesn't go too far elsewhere. While few of the game's enemies diverge from their origins in well, Resident Evil 4, the Regenerator appropriated a quality of Revelation 2's signature enemies, the Revenants. These dudes are these massive grafted humanoid enemies that stumble around like broken puppets. Their gimmick is that only their weak spot is vulnerable to damage, but it's concealed somewhere inside their body, which coincidentally can heal itself. Sound familiar? The technique for offing these guys is to shoot at their different body parts, causing enough damage to tear them apart and reveal whether the weak spot is there or elsewhere. Once you find which of their appendages hides their big glowing orb, you can focus all fire there until killed. Now, Resi 4's Regenerator shtick has always been that you need a thermal scope to locate their hidden internal weak spots. Until today. In the remake, the enemy designers cleverly added another way to locate their weak spots, doing damage to their bodies, shredding their skin to spot exactly where the little glowing spots are beneath, and shooting at them. While not perfect, it's alleviated a lot of the difficulty in those first few encounters, and honestly, it's a great idea. The Revenants were not so secretly supposed to be the spiritual successors to the Regenerators, so it made me really happy to see an element of their design survive all the way to the remake of Resi 4. While the Resi 4 remake feels a lot like Revelations 2, so much so that if I squinted I could trick my brain into thinking that that's what it was, it's sadly missing some of the quality of life improvements Revelations introduced. That's why I was so disappointed after having unlocked a freaking neural pathway between Resi 4 and Revelations, because that sudden little mental click spoiled everything I'd come to appreciate about the remake so far. It turned my experience with Resi 4 from, wow, this is a really great remake, they paid a lot of attention to bringing in what mattered and culling what didn't, and the constant change-ups are keeping me on my toes, to... I waited almost 20 years for something that feels and plays the same as a game from almost 10 years ago. For real, bro. I thought about how much time all these cool new ideas were left to stagnate while they returned to form and played around with the first-person perspective. It made me wonder if, had they brought in some Resi 4 stages into raid mode back then too, would that have scratched the same itch as this remake does today? Maybe. But here's the thickest layer to this onion of disappointment. As copied as the game feel is, as much as Leon's new moves afford you the same agencies as Barry's did before, it's what's on the other end of your crosshairs that's the real problem. The greatest difference between RE4 and Revi 2 are their enemy rosters. See, this level of control needs to be met by a cast of ghoulies who really challenge you, who push you to achieve a higher level of skill, or at the very least explore the depths of your moveset, who force you to engage with the game in a way that a tank-controlled protagonist couldn't. There needs to be a reason for the game to control this well. Your opponents. Sure, Resi 4's infected Spaniards did all receive mechanical makeovers, but even so, they pale in comparison to the sheer variety of wacky Baltic zombie fuckers Barry has to deal with. I hinted before that Revi 2's raid mode is a massive composite structure of parts pulled from previous Resi games. Those parts include not only stages, characters, and weapons, but also enemies. It's almost like an All-Stars mode, or a 2010s Resident Evil Greatest Hits album. The Executioner is here, the I Need a Hug guy is here, hell, even Donkey Kong is here. To spice it up, they also introduced enemy power-ups. In the harder stages, bad guys would randomly be granted special abilities like super speed, poisonous gas, invisibility, gigantism, force fields, or any combination of any number of other existing power-ups. A shitty basic zombie dude could suddenly become a formidable bullet sponge with the right set of powers. Worse, a boss enemy with a one-hit kill attack could be given a truly terrifying combo of, for example, super speed and mini mode, making them hard to track and evade and easier to slip up and get one hit by. There were even dudes with glowing auras around them that cursed you to die in 30 seconds if you came in proximity unless you killed them in time, and sometimes also passively granted random power-ups to other enemies by that same proximity. A deadly, deadly combination. All this to say, the power-up system expanded on the already strong enemy variety here. Some of these stages and enemies might have looked familiar, but you had no way of knowing what to expect walking into each one. Which, ding ding ding, explains the need for more intricate character controls. In order for it to be fair to be thrown into the ring with some of these enemies from previous games, the characters needed to be as fluid as those in Resi 6, notoriously the series' furthest departure from survival horror and closest approach to straight-up arcade action. Yet somehow the team behind Revi 2 managed to solve a seemingly impossible problem. Draft a moveset with a wide enough range of applications and high enough skill ceiling to fit in a more action-oriented game mode, but where every action still feels heavy and deliberate. Less like you're controlling a super soldier, more like a tank. because it needed to. Remember, some of the first Revelation games levels and enemies were here too, and that game, given it was a 3DS exclusive, necessarily returned to tank controls because its platform didn't have a second thumbstick. RE2 needed a complex and snappy enough character to keep pace with quick-moving enemies like those in the more fast-paced games, but whose actions still felt deliberately burdensome, ensuring bad decisions didn't go unpunished. It also needed to not allow players to overpower or outmaneuver slower foes who weren't originally designed with this level of action in mind. How'd they do it? Well, first off, they fucked off with the rolling, and they fucked off with the butt scooting. What the hell were they ever thinking with that in the first place? And they said, hey, how about a crouch and a weighty dodge instead? Bang. That's it. And for good measure, reloading is going to be slow as hell, and recoil is going to be uninterruptible. Bam. Done. Sound familiar? 'Cause it should. The character control RE4 inherited came from the Resident Evil with the greatest enemy variety of them all, whose character's movement was designed expressly around compatibility with, and giving the player a fair but not unfair chance against, enemies new and old. Hell, the director's explicitly stated intent with raid mode was to make something to play for over 500 hours without feeling stale. That's the reason it had to feel so fluid but also so hard to get good at. These controls were meant to be mastered over days and days and days of playing a game whose content was being trickled out in an episodic format. Whatever. Why is it a problem, or why is it that I think it's a problem that RE4 used a control scheme that was overqualified for it? Or maybe better said, that its enemies were underqualified to oppose a player with? Well, a couple of weeks after launch, when they added the game's Mercenaries mode, a notoriously really difficult sub-game in the original, everyone and their grandma noticed right away that it was way too easy to get an S rank granted this new maneuverability. RE4 is one of the most well-paced games I've ever played, but its remake feels unbalanced. When it clicked for me, it was obvious. I fought off hordes of enemies much more varied, complex, and difficult than RE4's villagers and cultists that this feels like child's play. These guys are unfairly matched. In raid mode, I was fighting for my life, like I was that third monkey on the ramp to Noah's Ark when, brother, it started to rain. These dumbass villagers have no idea what sort of shit I've seen, what sort of things I'm capable of. I unlocked the samurai sword. I've got all 5 fucking medals on every stage in raid mode. That means I beat each one without being overleveled, I never healed myself once, and I even killed the optional enemies. Why? Because it was fun as fucking hell. It's overkill playing RE4 this smoothly. It's like taking a rocket launcher to a food fight. These guys might as well be coming at me with yogurt tubes, fucking morons. Here's the point. In constructing a remake of RE4 around the much more expressive controls of RE2, they forgot how that level of agency was matched by an exceptionally challenging and diverse roster of enemies. While RE4's enemy AI is definitely impressive, the addition of just, what, a cowhead guy, some crooked neck dudes, and a new behavior for the spider parasite guys, it doesn't even come close to matching the breadth of possible opponents and the depth of possible encounters by their combination that this control scheme was built for. It would have been much more interesting had they done one of two alternatives. One, kept RE2's moveset but experimented with more new enemy types and behaviors than the few they did, or two, come up with entirely new controls and combat mechanics, maybe with the goal of making a more faithful remake of RE4 in terms of game feel at least. My worry is that, if this trend continues, 2 remakes from now, Resi will have reinvented something very similar to the controls that RE6 already has. RE4's remake's new controls will evolve and converge back with where the series was way back in 2012. And at that point, you guys are all going to have to choose between one of 2 pills, or pizzas, it seems. Either that these remakes were a waste of time, and that the series has been stagnant for over a decade, or that RE6 was way ahead of its time and is actually a fucking masterpiece. And from my experience trying to argue that point in the past, I don't think any of you losers are ready to admit that. Me though, no intervention needed. I've been RE6-pied the whole fucking time. It would have been a lot better if I wasn't eating this fucking, like, 3 days after I made them and that they've been in the fridge.
Shit, I can't do another take of that. I hope it was good. Don't forget to like, comment, and order a pizza. Oh shit. For real, find yourself a nice pizza. What the fuck is this? Has this been on my head the whole fucking time? What the fuck?